Hey, warmer friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Graves Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an incredible podcast for you as we're doing another conference preview edition on this podcast today. We are getting into the big boys. We're looking at the ACC. Who better to have on than Tristan Freeman of Bussin' Brackets to be able to help me break down this conference. He does a tremendous job looking at all 364 D1 teams. He's based out there in the great state of Pennsylvania. In the second segment, we're going to be joined by him to look at all 18 of these rosters, the nooks and crannies of everything, all the coaching changes that we've seen in terms of the ACC, who are going to be some of the impact transfers. Here in the first segment, we're going to be taking a look at the betting trends and the overall just statistics, the styles of play in terms of these ACC teams. And then in the final segment, I'm going to give you guys my projector finish for all 18 teams in the ACC. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Juden_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And since I am doing a conference preview today, and since I did one yesterday as well, you guys got the American Conference preview yesterday. That means that anything that I missed on Tuesday and Wednesday in terms of college basketball news and notes, those are going to be polished up on the podcast tomorrow. So have no fear. We've got you guys all covered there. And let's get down to business and let's take a look at an ACC in which really doesn't have too many super duper up-tempo teams. I think a lot of people, when they think of the big boys, they think of teams that are going to get out there, they're going to run it and gun it. And certainly in the past, North Carolina has been one of those teams, but North Carolina discovered something that really eluded them 2 years ago when they were just a disaster. They went from being number one in the nation to not making the NCAA tournament. That was that thing called defense, and it really took hold. They were still a bit of an up-tempo team last year. They were 58th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, but you've noticed a lot of teams starting to dial things back a little bit more, and I think that actually boded very well for them when it came to the fact that they were able to get so many teams to make runs in the NCAA tournament. NC State, they were about 165th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and seemingly every year under Kevin Keatts, they've gone a little bit slower. And with the coaching changes that we've seen in the ACC, we've seen a added emphasis on being able to play slowly. Like John Shire had Duke at 279th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. I mean, this is the second straight year in which Duke was in the bottom 100 in terms of total possessions per game. Under Coach K, he would pretty much just roll the ball out there and let the guys run, and that's not been the case with John Shire. Certainly, you still do have a few teams that they're going to be looking to play a little bit more up-tempo. They're going to be looking to run it and gun it a little bit more, but it's not quite what we've seen in past years. As Florida State was actually that top team in terms of tempo last year. They were 35th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and they were the lone team that was in the top 50. As number 2 was actually Syracuse. Under Adrian Autry, it's very clear that they're going to be looking to play a little bit of a different style than they did when they were under Jim Boeheim. So the teams that are coming in, by the way, they played a little bit more up-tempo last year as well, with Cal really being one of those teams that led the way. They were about 57th to 58th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and Stanford is going to look much different this year than they did a season ago. As last season, under Jared Haas, they actually played more up-tempo than they really ever have before. They were, in terms of total possessions per game, 46th, but now you bring in Kyle Smith. Kyle Smith was the coach over at Washington State last year, and Washington State, who made the NCAA tournament, had a lot of success. They were a good hearty 281st in terms of total possessions per game, and you saw Notre Dame really be a team that slowed it down as well. Notre Dame has never really been a team that has went out there, runned it, gunned it, what have you, but 339th in the country last season in terms of total possessions per game. So those are expecting, it's a big conference, we're going to see a lot of teams just get out there and absolutely rip it down your throat. No, they've actually been embracing quite a bit of defense, and for the defensive side of things, I was mentioning it with North Carolina, them having a little bit of an epiphany as in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis for this North Carolina unit. They were 29th in the country last year. That was really your best mark in the ACC, because typically when you think of great defense, you think of Virginia, and obviously they were another team that was in the bottom 12 in the country in terms of total possessions per game. I'd be remiss not to mention that, but Virginia, they were 13th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Massive home and road split though. Allowed 24 points more per 100 possessions when they were on the road rather than when they were at home. Kyle Smith, who was over at Washington State, had that team 42nd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Stanford comes in and not great footing with regards to their defense when they were under Jared Hass last year, 212th in the country with that regard, and Cal's going to be needing to find some defense as well. As for Cal, they were 250th in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. You saw Clemson just sort of make lemonade out of lemons with their defense. They were about 160th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but Duke, you could tell, is really bear down on defense. They were 33rd in the country last year in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and that's a big key for some of these teams like Florida State, 193rd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They had a miserable year. Georgia Tech, 264th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They had a miserable year. Meanwhile, a team like Notre Dame, who was able to sneak up on a ton of teams, they're about 106th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Again, not amazing, but I mean, that's a big reason why they were able to knock off some of these teams like a Boston College, who was more around 201st in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. And I would say throw away all the statistics that you saw out of Louisville last season. A Louisville team that in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, 330th. Like Kenny Payne got canned after 2 years, and typically when coaches get canned after 2 years, I am against it. But in this case, we knew after night number 1 that guy could not coach, and for Virginia Tech, we saw them fall in some tough times as well. 175th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and a lot of this does come back to rebounding as well. If you were able to rebound in this conference, you had yourself a shot. If you weren't able to rebound, well, it was a little bit more rough for you, as North Carolina was a top team in terms of their rebound rate. They were number 1 in the conference. Just overall, they were 12th in the country in terms of their overall rebound rate, and this is part of the reason why I do think that we are going to be able to see Stanford sooner rather than later. I think they're in for a rough year this year, but I think that they're actually going to acclimate well in this conference. As Kyle Smith with his Washington State team, they were 17th in the country in terms of rebound rate. He takes over Stanford, who was miserable on the glass last season, so that should be able to help them out quite a bit. Again, I think that they're probably going to need a year or two to acclimate, but it's going to be able to help them out as well. You saw Duke ranked 26th in the country in terms of their overall rebound rate. Once again, team that was able to do a very solid job in this conference as well. And then from there, you did have quite a bit of divide, but Pittsburgh, who's been very pesky, they were 49th in the country last year in terms of their overall rebound rate. You saw some pretty good results on the glass as well from Clemson. They were 72nd in the country in terms of their overall rebound rate. We saw them make a nice run to the Elite Eight, and Georgia Tech was one of those outliers, a team that was pretty solid on the glass, but they just weren't able to get a lot going. 81st in the country in terms of rebound rate, laying out the fact that they were well outside the top 260 in terms of their points allowed on a per possession basis. So that was something that really did nip them in the bud, and you did see Notre Dame once again be one of those pesky teams, 111th in the country in terms of their overall rebound rate. Meanwhile, the teams that they didn't have that willingness to be able to rebound, they were the teams that they really got gobbled up in this conference, as you didn't have one like truly just absolutely awful team on the glass. Typically, it feels like when it comes to these power conference teams, you typically have one team that's truly awful, and if you are looking for one, Syracuse at 330th, and they were a team that underwhelmed a little bit last year. They were right there, as it was a little bit less than tremendous for them, but if you're looking at other teams that just didn't hold up their end of the bargain, Florida State, another team that was underwhelming last year, they were 301st in the country in terms of their overall rebound rate, and less than savory results as well out of Louisville on the glass. They were 194th in the country in terms of our overall rebound rate. Cal being 183rd and losing quite a few pieces, that's probably going to be catching up with them a little bit as well. But if you look at the trends in the ACC, and obviously this is going to be a new ACC, SMU was actually a team that did a very solid job on the glass themselves last year. They were a top 50 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and SMU, they were 34th in terms of rebound rate. The reason why I haven't mentioned them too much is that they are taken over by Andy Enfield. This is going to be a brand spanking new team with them this year, but if you look at just what happened in the ACC last season, one of the most spread out conferences in all of college basketball, even before these moves. Like, now you're going to have teams going from Syracuse, New York, going on over to the great state of California, but even before this, you would have a team going from New York to Florida to play a game. You would have just things be very spread out in general, so it did lead to some pretty massive divides with regards to against the spread record, and you didn't have that one like truly awful team against the spread last season. Louisville was not good, but they were still 13-18-1 against the spread. That's not historically bad. Syracuse 13-19 against the spread, bad but not historically bad, and Yeah, Duke go 21-14-1 against the spread, which, given that they're a blue blood and given that you always see these teams get taxed quite a bit more, like North Carolina, they were 21-16 against the spread. That should be deemed a very good year because typically with these teams, you'll find them be just a tad below 500 against the spread, just given their name brand. But Pittsburgh was that team that was absolutely able to wreck shop. How about 21-9-3 against the spread last year? The only teams that were able to have a better cover rate than them, they were tied with South Florida at 21-9-3 against the spread. But UT Arlington, Minnesota, Stony Brook, lone three teams in all of college basketball that had a better against the spread record. And then you had a few other teams that were right around about 57 or so percent. Clemson was 20-15-1 against the spread. After that, it was Notre Dame, Wake Forest, 18-15 against the spread for Notre Dame, Wake Forest, 18-16-1 against the spread. And then a lot of 500 teams. A team like Miami went 14-16-2 against the spread. So not really too big of demonstrative splits, but I was alluding to it. You have a lot of travel when it comes to this conference, and that led to teams just really struggling on the road. Pittsburgh was by far your best team on the road, along North Carolina. We'll give them a little bit of credit. They were 7-3 against the spread in true road games. Pittsburgh 7-2-2 against the spread in road games. And then Clemson, Notre Dame 8-4 against the spread on the road. But Virginia Tech, a disaster at 2-10 against the spread on the road. NC State, Miami, Syracuse, all either 4-6-1 or 4-7 against the spread on the road. Wake Forest was 3-8 against the spread on the road. And then a lot of like 5-6 with Virginia, Florida State, Louisville, all there. Boston College was 6-8 against the spread on the road. And then these teams at home were really able to rebound. Wake Forest being the top among them, 13-5-1 against the spread at home. Pittsburgh, Virginia Tech, Virginia all either went 10-6-1 against the spread at home, 11-6 against the spread at home in terms of Virginia Tech as well. And then Duke goes 11-7 against the spread at home. A lot of teams were right around 500. You did see Notre Dame, NC State both go 8-9 against the spread at home. And really the lone team that was bad at covering at home was Louisville, 5-12-1 against the spread at home. And that's because they were just absolutely awful. But North Carolina, Clemson both either go 8-7 or 8-7-1 against the spread at home, as this was a conference that was very much made up of teams that were able to do a good job of covering as a favorite. Sans, obviously, Georgia Tech went 1-5 against the spread as a favorite, and Louisville went 3-6 against the spread as a favorite. But Duke, 20-12-1 against the spread as a favorite. Pittsburgh, 16-4-1 against the spread as a favorite. Wake Forest, 16-9-1 against the spread as a favorite. Virginia, 15-9-1 against the spread as a favorite. Virginia Tech, 12-9 against the spread as a favorite. North Carolina went 19-15 against the spread as a favorite. This was very much a favorites conference last season, as a lot of teams struggled as underdogs. Clemson embraced this role. They were 9-2 against the spread as an underdog, and North Carolina, they were an underdog 3 times. They went 2-1. Yip-de-doo there, but NC State 12-7-1 against the spread as an underdog. Obviously, much of that came in the NCAA tournament, but these teams that were down, they were just down bad. Boston College went 7-13 against the spread as a dog. Virginia Tech 3-10 against the spread as an underdog. Wake Forest, Virginia 2-7 against the spread as an underdog. Miami 5-7-1 against the spread as an underdog. Louisville 10-12-1 against the spread as an underdog. And it's going to be interesting to see how these Pac-12 teams really do acclimate themselves to this. As for Cal, they were actually 13-8-1 against the spread in the role of an underdog last season. Stanford was 6-7-1 against the spread in the role of an underdog. And you notice with both of these teams, Cal and Stanford, they were teams that they did an okay job against the spread on the road. Cal was 6-5 against the spread on the road. Stanford 4-6-1 against the spread on the road. But again, it is Kyle Smith who takes over, and his Washington State team, they were 5-5 against the spread on the road. The team that's going to be very intriguing is what we see this year out of SMU. It was an SMU team that had things rocking and rolling in non-conference play, and then in conference play, things went straight down the tubes for them, as they've got actually a really nice home court advantage on the road. Last year, they went 7-6 against the spread there, and then when they were at home, they actually had a little bit of a down season for their standards at 6-9-1 against the spread at home. But I do think that they're going to be able to take hold a little bit more with that home court advantage. And also with Cal and Stanford, if you're looking at a bit more of a totals perspective for them out in the Pac-12 last season, these were two teams that were overwhelming. Stanford 18-13-1 to the over last season. Cal 19 overs, 13 unders. And then for SMU, they were another one of those teams that, even though they played a lot of early unders, they were a team that earned out a little bit more towards conference play because of their non-conference play. They had 18 unders to 14 overs, but a little bit more 50-50 when they got into conference play. Meanwhile, for the entirety of the ACC, for the teams that returned, it was an overwhelming conference. You only had 4 teams that played fewer than 50% of their games to the over. Virginia, that's an obvious one, 19 unders to 15 overs. Miami, 18 unders to 14 overs. Notre Dame, 21 unders to 12 overs, as Micah Shrewsbury really slowed things down. And I don't think people are as alert as they should be on how Duke has slowed down in recent years as well. 23 unders to 13 overs, but Florida State, 66.6% of their games go over. 22-11 to the over. Wake Forest, 21-14 to the over. Boston College, 21-15 to the over. Pittsburgh, 18 overs, 13 unders, 2 pushes. Virginia Tech, 19 overs, 14 unders and a push. NC State, 23 overs, 17 unders and a push. Syracuse, 18-14 to the over. North Carolina, 19, 17-1 to the over. And then Georgia Tech, Clemson, Louisville, all 50-50 in terms of overs versus unders. And when it came to conference play, that's really where you saw a lot of these overs take hold, as you did see Duke slow things down in conference. They went 15 unders to 7 overs, and just due to injuries, because Miami, when they had an injury or two, that just really killed that team in conference. 14 unders to 7 overs, but Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, Florida State, Syracuse all played at least 66.6% of their conference games to the over, with Virginia Tech being chief among them. 14 overs, 6 unders and a push. Wake Forest and Florida State, 15 overs to 7 unders. Syracuse, 14 overs to 7 unders. And you tell that these teams, they were in a lot of cases just teams in a little bit of transition, trying out different stuff. For Florida State, they just didn't have the depth that they're used to. They were really willing to just run it and gun it. And then NC State, 15 overs to 11 unders in conference play. And Virginia actually played 13 overs to 9 unders. That's because they were just so rock solid with their defense at home. And then when they had to play road games, because they don't have to play too many out of conference, that led to more overs for them as well. So a little bit of a logical conclusion there. And when it came to non-conference slate, in terms of these ACC teams, you did see a few more teams play unders, but North Carolina, 11 overs, 2 unders and a push. In non-conference play, Florida State, Miami, 7 overs of 4 unders for both of them. Meanwhile, Virginia, 10 unders at 2 overs. When they play unfamiliar opponents, you see them just not be able to put the ball in the basket in general. So those are some of the betting trends that we've got with the ACC, and it's going to be a very fun ACC, one that now has 18 teams, and helping me break down every one of those teams next is our good friend Tristan Freeman. He does such great work over at Boston Brackets, and we're taking a nice deep dive on the ACC with him next, right here on Coach Get Soups with myself, Greg Hughes Peterson, now part of the Beats and Family Podcast, the ACC Conference Preview Edition. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coach Get Soups with myself, Greg Hughes Peterson, now part of the Beats and Family Podcast. This is the ACC Conference Preview Edition, so we have to look to a man that is just a wealth of college basketball knowledge for this one. It is Tristan Freeman. He's one of the main men over at Boston Brackets as FanSided's college basketball hub. He's doing a great job getting set for the upcoming season, looking at everything in his neck of the woods out there in the lovely state of Pennsylvania, but coupled with that, I know that he's following all 364 teams, doing a great job getting a lot of lists for the upcoming season as well. And you're able to follow him on Twitter/X at Oopsa351. And Tristan, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Greg. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you, Tristan. And let's start off for this ACC preview of taking a look at a team that's right out there in your neck of the woods in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, they signed Jeff Capel to an extension after 2 very nice years, and I think the big question is, will we see any sort of a fall-off this year? Because they do lose a lot of those main guys that were scorers last season, the main one being Bub Carrington, who did a little bit of everything for this team, but do you think that it is interesting that they just have so much size coming back, even with losing Federico from last season?
Yeah, I mean, you lose Federico, but you bring in Cam Corrin, who's a proven guy over at Florida State, who averaged around 9 and 3. A talented scorer. They seem to be expanding his offensive game and letting him shoot threes, but he's definitely an offensive upgrade from Federico. And you're going to need that because you don't have Blake Henson, the leading scorer from last year. You don't have Bub Carrington, who was a lottery pick. So you're going to rely on not only Corrin, but Damian Dunn, who was a former transfer from Houston, who was a prolific scorer during his time at Temple. And he's someone that's going to be asked to come in and give them offense as well. But I think Pitt's chances of winning is going to come down to how big of a leap Jalen Lowe takes. Former 4-star prospect who started off the bench, but Pitt played his best basketball when he was inserted into the starting lineup. He's a true point guard and a capable scorer and overall playmaker, someone to really like. And I think if he's a sophomore star for them, combined with the pieces they already have, they should be in the tournament mix once again.
Yep, they certainly should be in that middle, perhaps upper middle of the ACC, in my opinion. And you were alluding to Cam Corrin, who comes over from Florida State, and they're an interesting team in that They were so good about like 3, 4 years ago. We've seen quite a bit of a fall off ever since then, but the return of Jameer Watkins, I think, is absolutely massive. Now the question becomes, what sort of depth do they have as they lose the likes of Jalen Worley and company? They're going to be relying upon, in my opinion, a lot of Boston Holt, who's going to be coming over from Boston College. Utah is a place where he's been as well. And how do you take a look at a Florida State unit that I feel like they've got some good top end talent, including a nice freshman in Daquan Davis, but I question the depth, which is always so key for this team.
The proven ACC talent on this roster comes down to Watkins, and that's it. They have a 5-man recruiting class. Obviously, Daquan Davis is the guy who probably might start for him at point guard. It'll be him or Chandler Jackson. But there's shooting questions, there's size questions. I mean, Malik Awen was a JUCO All-American, but not all JUCO players translate to power conference level. Watkins could average 17, 7, and 5 for them this upcoming season, and they could still finish in the bottom 3. I think the bigger question is, what are they going to do with Leonard Hamilton, who's had a great career at Florida State, but they're moving downward. It's hard to see where things are going to get better for them after this year.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. For Florida State, it feels like the depth that we come to know and love with this team, it's not necessarily there. And for Virginia, they had probably the most, shall we say, explosive exit in the NCAA tournament last year in the way that they were not able to score. I think that they went a full 45 minutes in their NCAA tournament game against Colorado State without scoring a single point. Now they're looking to run it back with Isaac McNeely. They do lose quite a bit of the backcourt from a season ago, but I love the pickup of TJ Power, a former top 50 recruit that was over at Duke last year. I was mentioning the fact that Jalen Worley leaves Florida State. Well, he heads on over to Virginia. And what are your expectations for a Virginia team that feel like we know that this team is not going to be running it and gunning it, but I look at guys like Andrew Rohde and company as guys that, in my opinion, need to step up a little bit?
I mean, honestly, all of them need to step up outside of Isaac McNeely. Reese Beekman did just about everything for them, and you replaced him with Jalen Worley. He's a guy who can play at the ACC, but not necessarily a guy who can play at the highest level. So I'm concerned about the backcourt more than anything. I mean, Rohde didn't do much in his first year, but he could possibly, in second year in the system, be someone that can have a big year. Dante Harris is back after originally hitting the portal and effectively sitting out last year. And then, the bigs, I mean, Blake Buchanan, Anthony Robinson are guys that's going to be asked to give them something at the 5 spot, or San Diego State, Elijah Saunders. But yeah, unless Power is a 16, 17 point per game scorer and he's a lead guy for them, they're going to be a team that's going to once again have a lot of 50 to 45 games, and they're going to be vulnerable to losing to just about anyone.
Yeah, I agree with you there, as we do have our good friend in Tristan Freeman, who does such great work over at Boston Brackets, joining me for the ACC Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And this team is going to be a fun one that Louisville replaces pretty much everyone. They might have 1 or 2 walk-ons that return from last year, but if I'm not mistaken, they returned 0.0% of their scoring from a season ago. But as we know, Pat Kelsey comes in. He brings in all sorts of talent. Noah Waterman, Chucky Hepburn, Corin Johnson, Giovanni Hadley. You go down the list. I love these players on paper. I think the big question I have is, what is the chemistry going to look like? Because on paper, Louisville has a top 5 roster, in my opinion, in the ACC. I just don't know how that's going to look out there on the floor, though.
Yeah, and I don't know who the star is. I mean, they have a lot of proven guys. I mean, like you said, Corin Johnson, Fawn Hatley can definitely play at the ACC level. Terrence Edwards, the Sun Belt Player of the Year from James Madison. Chucky Hepburn, another guy who's a starter. Ali Khalifa, he's sitting out, but Kashawn Breyer is a guy who was a star for them in their expedition door, and Noah Waterman to stretch forward. There's a lot of pieces, but I don't know if there's an all-conference player. And it's great to have depth, but coaches are not going to play 10 to 12 guys. Although Pat Kelsey did have a lot of depth at Charleston, so maybe he could be the exception to that rule. I just need to see how it works out because, I do think they got a nice PR boost because they're one of the few teams that we actually got to see play, and that always helps things. But I am a little bit in wait-and-see mode with them. But I do think from top to bottom, they do have a top 5 roster, but it's the top that I think that can slow them down a bit.
Yep, I think that that is such a good point in that not necessarily knowing who that top flight scorer is going to be, like having watched Chucky Hepburn, who's one of the more highly touted guys coming in for Louisville. So remember him at Wisconsin. He would have flashes of brilliance and then he would just sort of fade into the abyss late in games as well. And when I look at the ACC, one team that's not being talked about a ton that I think could surprise some people is Syracuse. I love the pickup of Eddie Lampkin. He pairs up very well with a 7'4" gentleman, Naheem McLeod, which if they can fully unlock him, that is quite a weapon for the team. But even though they lose Judah Mintz, JJ Starlin is back. I like the game of Chris Bell. Yaquan Carlos coming over from Hofstra is big. When I look at the Syracuse team, I think that there's potential for them to, at the very minimum, be at the middle of the conference, if not perhaps creep into that like top 5, top 6 sort of mix.
Yeah, but losing Judah Mintz is a very big loss for them. And they were in semi-tournament range in Red Autry's first year. We'll see how that works out. The loss of Malik Brown, who was the all-defensive big man for them, that's also going to play a factor. Can J.J. Starlin be a lead guard of a tournament team? That remains to be seen. Can Chance Restry, the former top 100 prospect who was injured last year, can he finally be healthy and show the same promise came out of high school? Donnie Freeman's a top 30 forward prospect who has a chance to possibly start if it's not Jair Davis. They have the pieces for sure. I'm just not sold on Syracuse in general, including the coach Autry, because I thought last year's roster was good enough to make the tournament, but it wasn't good enough. Maybe there's more balance this time around, but yeah, still some questions.
Yep, there are certainly a few questions, and coming into the season, we thought that this might be the worst team in the ACC last year. They were able to creep up, they were able to win some games, and now the question is, how do they build off of that momentum from last season? And I'm talking about Notre Dame. With Notre Dame, they bring back Marcus Burton, who was able to do a little bit of everything for them last season. Nice go-to scorer. Matt Oloko is able to go Oloko from three-point range. He comes in from Princeton. Nikita Kuznetsovsky, hopefully I said that correctly. That is an insane last name to say. He is coming in from Monmouth. You've got Tate Davis back. Brandon Shrewsbury was much better than I thought he was going to be last season. I take a look at this Notre Dame team, and I think that they've got one of the best coaches in the ACC. The question is, can that grit and that toughness be able to translate into wins this season, much like they were able to surprise a lot of people last year?
It definitely was a nice surprise, and particularly Burton, who is a quality scorer for them. My question is there more that they can improve on? Because I'm not sure there's much more that Burton in particular can do. The front court remains a big question. I think Tate Davis being their best big on paper isn't a glowing endorsement of how much better they can move in the ACC. We'll see if the transfer bigs can give them anything. I do like the fact that Shrewsbury had a really nice second half of the year. If he can be consistent from start to finish and be a potential all-league guy, then that changes things for them, because I do think that they're looking for one other guy that can be a really big impact player. Otherwise, it's just going to be Burton or bust.
Yep, I think that Burton or bust is a very good way of putting it. And when I take a look at this team, I think that it's Heisier Miller or bust. And I'm talking about Virginia Tech with Mike Young. The offense has always been rock solid at Virginia Tech. The defense is a question mark, and I think that they've got one of the more underrated home courts in all of college basketball. Having to head on over and having to play at Virginia Tech is one of the toughest road trips they're going to make. And I like Toby Lowell, who comes in from VCU, but I feel like depth-wise, there's a little bit of something to be desired here with Virginia Tech, and with Melajal Poteet, I don't know if he's going to be able to step up either. I've personally got my question marks with Virginia Tech.
Yeah, and they were one of the teams that lost a ton of talent, but they could have returned everyone outside of Hunter McCoy or Mekhi Long. The others just opted to transfer out, and that's never a good sign. I mean, Heisier Miller is a guy that can score, but he didn't really win anything at Temple. You bring in Jayden Schuh, who's a former Duke player who will definitely get a ton of minutes, but we'll see if he can be a breakout guy for them. And then, you mentioned Toby Lowell, who's a really nice athlete, but he didn't play a ton at VCU and he wasn't very impactful. So I don't know if moving up a level is going to unlock him. And then Ben Burham, who's a role player at Charleston, I think he's more just a role player. I just don't know where the points are going to come from, and I don't know where the defense is ultimately going to come from. I think this is a roster that they did the best they could considering the losses, but I think there's a huge uphill climb for them.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you mentioned the phrase of an upward climb. As joining me on the show, we've got Tristan Freeman, who does great work over at Boston Brackets, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. Says Boston College, successful year last year. They were able to win 20 games, but boy, oh boy, they lose darn near everything from last year. Each of their top 5 scorers are gone, and Quentin Post, I thought, was one of the most vital players to their respective teams in all of college basketball last year. A 7-footer who did a great job on the glass, blocked shots, popped it from 3-point range. Him being out is rough, and now they're trying to replace him with Chad Venning, and I just don't know how that's going to be going. Fine player at St. Bonaventure. He clearly is not Quentin Post. They bring in someone like a Dion Brown who's able to give you a little bit of scoring. Roger McFarland, he was solid over at Southeast Louisiana, but going from the Southland to the ACC, I've got big time question marks here with Boston College.
Yeah, and their best player might be Dion Brown, who averaged 7 rebounds a game as a 6'3" guard, but he might end up being the elite and rebounder because Chad Benning, as you mentioned, he's a big body. He's a very good low post scorer, but he only plays around 22 minutes a game, and they have no depth outside of him. So I'm not sure what they're going to do. Joshua Beatles, a transfer from Clemson, but he was really a seldom used role player. I just don't trust anything that they have. And ultimately, they have a good coach, and they still always find a way to be competitive, and they're never truly at the bottom of the ACC. But there's some questions, well, a lot of questions with this roster construction. And unless, some of the sophomores, such as Donald Hand or Elijah Strong, unless they can break out, they could find themselves in the bottom 3.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And when it comes to the coach of this team, I absolutely love Mark Madsen, but your number 1 of Cal going to the ACC, I think might be a little bit tough on them because they had 2, I'm going to say 3 guys that were top flight guys. Jalen Cone, he was a little bit of a black hole every time you passed him the ball. The ball was not coming out. He was shooting it, but I mean, he was a nice scorer. Bardoz Amick was a double-double machine last year, and Jalen Tyson got drafted into the NBA draft. All 3 of these guys are gone. Now they're going to be looking to Ryan Petratus, who was a nice fill-it-up sort of guy over at Air Force, but a bad shot for him at Air Force was better than a good shot for so many other guys, so he's a little bit of a chucker as well. You're bringing BJ Omot, nice scorer over at North Dakota. How does that production over at North Dakota translate to Cal? You've got Christian Tucker coming in from UTSA, and I like Andrei Stojakovic as well. But again, with California, how do these guys from the lower level step up and play in the ACC, I think is a big question.
Yeah, I think the guys you trust the most are Olado Joseph from Minnesota and Stojakovic from Stanford. I think they'll be fine, but the center position is made up of Mady Sissoko and Lee Dort, which, they can eat minutes if that's what you're asking for, but they're not going to give you much. In the point guard situation, it could be anyone. I mean, they got DJ Campbell, Christian Tucker, Javon Blackshear from Grand Canyon. They're going to have to figure out which of those guys are, and it might take them a while because ideally one of them breaks out and takes over as the lead ball handler. But if not, then they're going to have to just have a merry-go-round and giving everyone a shot. I think there are pieces to like, and I think ultimately if you're Cal rebuilding in the ACC, you just want to find the building blocks. But like you said, it could be very rough, especially considering that they're going to have to go on the road trips over across the country and take on these teams. But at the same time, they could be a spoiler because some of these teams are going to have to go on the road to California and take on them. And no matter how bad they could potentially be, a true road game in January and February is going to be tough for some of these ACC bubble teams.
Yep, no question about it. And I feel the exact same way about Stanford. Kyle Smith, I thought, was a home run hire. He did amazing work over at Washington State, and now he's got his work cut out for him with Stanford as they bring in Chisa Mokpara. Obviously had the grades to be able to get into Stanford because he comes over from Harvard, 6'8" guy that I really like, and they were able to maintain a few guys from his season ago. Most notably Maximine Reynaud, 7'1" gentleman that's able to pop it from 3-point range. Osiah Sellers, he's going to be staying out west after last season. He was over at USC. But again, I've got my question marks with the Stanford team, especially at the point guard spot where Benny Geller might be your main guy, and that's not a place, in my opinion, that you want to be.
Yeah, and Stanford in the transfer portal era, their options are extremely limited, as you can say. So they have to hit a home run with the guys they do get. They do bring back Renard, who can be an all-ACC guy. Jalen Blake's the Duke transfer. He actually started for Duke, and I think, with a guaranteed 25-plus minute per game, I think he can be a double-digit scorer for them. But they're going to need Okpara to be a quality player just to be competitive in league play. I think there's definitely a lot of depth in terms of power conference talent, and they're also going to have to go on the road and win some of these games. But I do think their top-end talent is good enough to keep them at least in the discussion of capable of beating anyone at any given time.
Yep, I think so as well. I think that that's a good point that you mentioned with Blake's coming over from Duke as well. And then when it comes to NC State, I don't think that they're going to be making the Final Four once again, as DJ Burns is not going to be walking through that locker room. And they're going to be investing in two guys that was part of that disaster over at Louisville last season, and Brandon Huntley-Hatfield along with Mikey James. And we've seen the track record of those guys that transferred out of Louisville in the Kenny Payne era. Not good to say the least, but I feel like Ben Middlebrooks is a little bit of an under-the-radar guy. And Michael O'Connell, he really didn't do much prior to that big giant run, but during that run, he was one of the biggest pieces. He and Jaden Taylor, in my opinion, are really going to need to shoulder the load for NC State to be able to duplicate some of that success from last season.
You mentioned James and Huntley-Hatfield. Those are guys that at least showed promise at Louisville, and at least they show they can do some things winning-wise. I think Huntley-Hatfield could be one of the best bigs in the ACC. He was in the second half of last year, so that was a good pickup. We'll see if Marcus Hill, who averaged 20 a game in Bowling Green, if he can at least be a double-digit scorer, because they do bring back Jaden Taylor. You mentioned Michael O'Connell, who's a good distributor. And then Dontre Styles, the combo forward transfer from Georgetown, he's a double-digit scorer as well. It definitely will be interesting if, these guys come from losing situations, can get some of that winning magic that NC State had last year. But I do think from a talent perspective that there's some real potential with this team.
Yep, I do think so as well. I think that this could be a little bit of a boom or bust year for them, and I feel that way about this team as well. As we've got Tristan Freeman, who does great work over at Boston Brackets, joining me for the ACC Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and that'd be SMU. I love the fact that they pick up Kevin Boopy Miller. He was a double-figure scorer over at Wake Forest, can come in right away, help facilitate that offense along with Chuck Harris. I love that. You bring in Matt Cross. He was a nice double-figure scorer over at UMass. He's able to give you some rebounding. Gary Oquendo, a little bit of a chucker in his time at Georgia, but was able to find his game when he was over at Oregon last season. And Yohan Traore, a lot of people forget he's a former top 50 recruit that put up double figures last year at UC Santa Barbara. With SMU, I feel like things could go very right for this team, or things could go very wrong. I'm not sure how you feel, but I feel like this is one of the teams that has one of the highest ceilings and the lowest floors in the ACC this year.
They come over from the AAC and they were a middle tier team. So I think, from an outside perspective, you're expecting them to be the one that struggles the most in league play. But as you said, they got guys who are ACC talent that we know of. We know Oquendo can play at the ACC level. We obviously know Boopy Miller can. They bring back Chuck Harris, who is a really good impact transfer for them. Yohan Traore, who's a five-star guy. We'll see if a year of minutes at UC Santa Barbara can sort of help him get back into form. And then Matt Cross, who obviously is ACC history with two other teams. So I think there's definitely potential there. Andy Enfield is a coach that I've never been 100% sold on, because it feels like the more talent he has, the more he's likely to underachieve. But they're definitely going to be an interesting spot, because teams having to travel to Texas is going to be interesting. And they have guys who won't be intimidated to play at the ACC level, which is different from some of these other rebuilding rosters like a Cal, who brought in a lot of mid-major guys.
Yep, absolutely. And when it comes to Georgia Tech, I feel like last year was a success for Damon Stoudemire. Certainly there were a few head-scratching losses, but I thought that he did a relatively solid job at Georgia Tech. Now the question becomes how he's going to be able to keep things moving forward. As Bay Ndongo, he was a 6'8", little bit of a combo guy that did a nice job blocking shots. He was able to pop a few threes. He's going to be back. You get back Kawasi Reeves as well, but they do lose a few pieces from his season ago as well. I think that that's going to be hurting them. You were expecting some of the transfers that they brought in to just be able to provide a little bit more. No longer having someone like a Kyle Sturvant as well, I think is going to be a little bit rough for them. How do you see a Georgia Tech team that I feel like they did some nice things last season, but I don't know if they're going to be able to duplicate them without that top scorer Miles Kelly being out?
Yeah, but at the same time, Kelly shot under 40% from the field, and he had a lot of games where he struggled. I think a case can be made that JVM McCollum is an upgrade, just at least from an efficiency standpoint. And with Nathan George back anyway as the lead guard, then I think you don't necessarily need a star. Jaden Mustaf, who's a top 30 player, commit for them. I think he's going to be one of the best freshmen in the conference. And as you mentioned, Bain Ndongo, who was an outstanding revelation for them. He's someone that if he entered the portal would have got plenty of interest. He's going to be back as a quality player as well. If they just get enough shooting, then I think that they're going to be a team that competes for an NCAA tournament bid. But at the same time, last year was filled with true highs where they was able to get some big wins, but they also had a lot of bad losses too. So I am curious on if this team as a whole is consistent enough and if David Stoudemire is going to be able to get some of those bad losses out the way. Otherwise, they're just going to end up finishing the bottom tier, even if they get a top win every now and then.
Yeah, it's going to be a very fascinating season for them. And they were a team that was a little bit towards the bottom of the ACC. And I will go out here on a limb and say Miami will not finish 14th in the ACC this year. If they finish 14th in the ACC this year, things have went horribly wrong for this team. But I think the question is, how much of a rise can we expect after things went oh so wrong for them? I think that the defense needs to be a little bit better, but you bring back Matthew Cleveland, you bring back Nigel Pack, two nice double-figure scores. Love the fact that they bring in Brandon Johnson. This guy was able to do a little bit of everything while he was over at East Carolina last season. Lynn Kidd coming in, that's going to be big as he was a nice rebounder over at Virginia Tech. I don't have my question marks with the offense, especially with Jalen Blackman, a 20-point per game scorer at the lower level coming in. I think the big question is, can they just play a lick of defense this year?
I think Omier was a double-double machine. He was the guy that impacted the game all the time, but he also was basically a 6'7" center for them. And I think having Lynn Kidd and Brandon Johnson in the fold as guys who can be double-digit scorers, but also just natural, capable bigs that can produce, I think will be helpful. And as you mentioned, Jalil Bethea, who was a five-star freshman, he could possibly force his way in there to start. He's a guy that people think can be one and done. Obviously, Nigel Pack is one of the best shooters in the country. I am interested if Bethea will play more on ball because Pack seems to be best when he's playing off ball. When he's the one being a decision maker, that they can struggle. I think that's going to be a question mark. But as you said, there's just too much natural talent for this team to be bad. It feels like they have the third best talent, but at the same time, last year still happened. And even though they have talent, you're still wondering, okay, does some of these core pieces of a Cleveland and Pack, are they good enough to be leaders on a winning team?
Yep, I'm so glad that you mentioned the fact that they might be third best in terms of talent in the ACC because my number 3 team is Wake Forest. The fact that they bring back Hunter Salas, Efton Reed, two guys that actually played together before going to Wake Forest over at Gonzaga. I feel like that's a big deal. Cameron Hildreth is a guy that's able to stuff the stat sheet. He's had a triple-double or two in his career. Parker Fredrickson coming off the bench and being able to pop threes is big. And the biggest gripe that I had with Wake Forest last year was that they didn't have a lot of depth. Tyler Johnson coming in is going to be able to help out. And Omar Blue is a guy that was a former top 30 recruit over at Iowa State, has had a few issues in terms of injuries, a little bit off the court as well. But that's a guy that at 6'8", I think can really be a contributor in Wake Forest. I think has better depth this year. It's a put up or shut up year for Steve Forbes, and just with the sort of coach that he is, I think he's going to put up, and I think that Wake Forest busts out this year.
Wake Forest at times were not very good on the defensive end. I think there's more predicated on just outscoring teams. I think that's something that has to improve on. But anyone that has some third in their power rankings, I can't argue with it because Steve Forbes loves breakout transfers, and he has several opportunities. You mentioned Billude, who's the 5-star guy from Iowa State. Davin Crosby is a former top 40 guy at Alabama. Tyler Johnson, who showed great flashes as a freshman at Louisville, and I think someone who Louisville probably would have loved to keep, the one guy. If any of them breaks out when you already have Hildreth and Salas, I can't argue with them being the third best team, but at the same time, Steve Forbes can't beat good teams. I mean, that's been the big issue. That's why they haven't been able to make the tournament. They're capable of beating anyone who's solid and below, but they haven't been able to beat ranked caliber teams. And until they do that, then it's hard for me to have them so high in the standings because in order to do that, you have to beat better teams.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that this is a team that was able to learn that last season. As joining me on the show, we do have Tristan Freeman, who does great work over at Boston Brackets, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and that'd be Clemson. Clemson, they scheduled hard in the non-conference last year, got the job done there, and then they got the job done in the NCAA tournament all the way to the Elite Eight. They're going to be missing quite a few of those top guys from a season ago, but Chase Hunter, one of the main contributors in the backcourt, is back. Love the fact that they bring in Jaden Zachary, who was a big part of what Boston College was doing last season, has some good familiarity in the ACC. And I think that Miles Foster, who comes over from Monmouth along with Illinois State, he's going to be a nice contributor as well. I think it would be far-fetched to expect Clemson to be able to make another Elite Eight run, but I don't think the fallout for Clemson is going to be as big as many people are anticipating.
Yeah, Brad Underwood has always had his teams be competitive. I think the reason why he was on the hot seat is because he failed to get them to break through, but coming off an Elite Eight appearance, I think we can put those issues to bed. I'm really interested in Duke transfer Christian Reeves because we've seen Duke guys go somewhere and get bigger minutes and end up breaking out. If he can do that, if he can be anywhere near the level of PJ Hall was for them, that would be big. But also keep an eye on Jake Heidbrenner, who redshirted last year, coming off of averaging 17 a game in Air Force. Assuming he's good to go, that he gives them another score and a shooting threat on the perimeter alongside Zachary and Hunter. I agree with you that they do have plenty of scoring potential. I do wonder how good they'll be on the wings because they definitely lost a lot. And the loss of Jack Clark is an underrated one for them as well.
Yep, that Jack Clark loss I think is very big for them, and he's going to tear it up at VCU in my opinion as well. And I know you were talking about a Duke transfer, so how about if we do dive in on Duke? And if you don't have the team number one, you just let me know because I'd look at Tyrese Proctor coming back to be able to help facilitate the offense. That's big. They do lose a few guys, including Jeremy Roach was a little bit of a surprise, but Cooper Flagg is just an absolutely awesome player. We saw Kamen Maluch, hopefully I said that correctly, actually star in the Olympics. That was a very fun story to say the least. They bring in Sion James, 6'6", do-it-all sort of player over from Tulane. Caleb Foster is back as well. I like the game of Malik Brown, and I take a look at Duke, and they're the team I think out of the ACC has the best shot of being able to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. I think the Cooper Flagg, we need to be talking about player of the year potential with them.
Yeah, I'm not going to be the one that derails the Flagg hype train. I think obviously his two-way potential is something that's going to translate very well. I think, one player to watch is Caleb Foster, who's a guy who started for them as a freshman, dealt with injuries, but he can easily be a breakout star. And you have him with Proctor and Tulane transfer Sion James. And then the freshman, Colin Knuppel and Isaiah Evans, there should be plenty of shooting. I am curious on what front court lineup still use because they do have Mason Gillis, who's a three-point sharpshooter from Purdue, and they also have Malik Brown, who is an all-ACC defender from Syracuse. How they'll pair them with Flagg and what they'll do with guys like Bongba and Maluk. I think the rotations is definitely going to be something to watch, but just from a talent standpoint, there's no question that they have the most from top to bottom.
Yep, and we've got one team left to take a look at, and that would be North Carolina. And it's hard for me to put this team anywhere other than number 2 in terms of my ACC standings. The biggest question I have is Drake Powell, Ian Jackson, those 2 freshmen. How do they lump in with RJ Davis and Elliot Kadu? And I think that Kadu is going to be able to have a nice season. Obviously, probably he's not going to be the number 1 guy. That's RJ Davis. He's a guy that has been so proven, has done it time and time again in the biggest of spots. But did like the pickup of Cade Tyson. Have a few question marks with Van Allen Lubin, but I think that he can be a contributor as well. And for North Carolina, I think the biggest question for them is that low post depth because Armando Bacot was there for 100 billion years, and that I think could be the biggest fall for them, perhaps looking at Jalen Washington for a few more minutes.
Yeah, returning ACC Player of the Year, RJ Davis instantly makes them a top 10 team and ACC contender. He's back as the best proven player. Cadeau is someone that I think could be in for a breakout. They have 2 5-star guard wings to add to the rotation, Ian Jackson, Drake Powell. If those guys can give them anything, that'll be big. And you mentioned Cade Tyson, the Belmont transfer. But they missed out on several transfer targets, reportedly, including a Cliff Murrier. Had they landed someone like them, then I think they would have been the team to beat in the ACC. But there's definitely questions in the front court. Van Allen Lubin was a good player at Vandy, but he didn't change the world. Jalen Washington's going to have plenty of chances to break out for them. And then Jalen Withers, who's a solid guy in the rotation we'll see if James Brown gives them anything. But the play of the front court is going to determine, are they a true Final Four contender, or are they just a really good team next year? Because you know what the backcourt's going to give you.
Yep, you certainly do know what the backcourt is going to give you, and we always know what is going to be delivered by you, Tristan. Great information. You do such an amazing job taking a look at this wonderful game of college basketball. You're getting set for what is going to be a tremendous season. I know that you're doing a lot of rankings, a lot of lists, and so much more. So love to get people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yep, you can follow me at hoopsnut351 on Twitter/X. You can also follow at my site, Bustin' Brackets. And we're now 50 days left before the season starts and plenty of ACC and other content to deal with.
Absolutely, and Tristan does a great job following all 364 D1 teams, does a great job with his own beat out there in the lovely city of Pittsburgh, and every single time he joins me, lends such good insights. A big thanks to Tristan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. This is the ACC Conference Preview Edition, so coming in next, I give you my projector or finish for the ACC. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be able to get Tristan Freeman aboard, who does such amazing work over at Bustin' Brackets. Taking a look at this great game of college basketball, getting us set for what is going to be such an amazing season in college basketball this year. Every single time he joins me, he lends such good insights. Did so once again today for an ACC that I feel like we've got two top teams, and then from there, we've got a big, giant, jumbled up mess that I have to sort through. So big thanks to him to add a little bit of clarity to this conference. He joined me in the last segment. Now it is that time in the podcast. I give you my projector or finish for the ACC. Do note that because both today and yesterday I did a conference preview. Yesterday I did the American Conference preview. Anything that I missed out on in terms of news in college basketball over the last 48 hours, and I'm going to call it what it is. Not really a lot of news coming down here in the last 48 hours. I will be polishing that up on the podcast tomorrow. Always want to give as much sparkle and shine as humanly possible to these conferences when I do my previews. And how about if we dive in on my projector or finish with dead last, number 18 being Boston College. Like, I mean it when I say it. Quinton Post was one of the most vital players to their respective teams in college basketball last season. They lose each other top 5 scorers from a season ago. Jaden Zachary being out, that's relatively rough. Donald Hayne Jr. was able to give you a little bit of production. And Roger McFarland is someone that stands 6'5". He was solid at Southeast Louisiana. He just doesn't have the size, in my opinion, to be able to bang down low in this conference. Chad Venning does at 6'10", but even when he was at St. Bonaventure, he was logging less than 5 rebounds per game, and now you're looking at Deion Brown, who was solid at UMBC last year. 19 points, 7.5 boards, 2.5 assists, good three-point shooter, but you're relying upon someone that started for 1 year at UMBC, was on the bench 2 seasons ago at UMBC, being one of your top-flight options in the backcourt. This is not a place where you want to be. Boston College was a little bit more of a mid-tempo team last season. You can tell that they were embracing that just a tad bit more. They're going to need to be built on defense with Earl Grant going all the way back to his days in the CAA. He very much does embrace, but the team was also rough with their three-point shooting defense as well. They weren't even necessarily amazing on the glass last year, and now that's going to take a big, giant pitfall this year. So Boston College, number 18 in terms of my projector finish. There's going to be quite a few people who are going to disagree with this, but number 17, I'm going with Virginia Tech. The loss of Lynn Kidd is massive. The fact that this team under Mike Young has really not played a lot of defense, that's very glaring as well. And if they would have kept some of their guys from a season ago, if they would have been able to keep someone like a Sean Padula on campus, if they even would have someone like a Tyler Nickel, I'd be feeling relatively okay about this team. But you bring back Malajeo Petit. I always have a tough time saying that name. He's a former reserve at Rice that gave the team about 6.5 points per game last season. I don't think that they did the world's greatest job in terms of their transfer portal haul. Ben Burnham is someone that at 6'7" is able to give you some boards. He's able to pop it from 3. And I do like Toby Lowell. Lowell should be able to give this team a little bit more defense down low, but you're pretty much banking on Hyzier Miller coming out there and lighting the world on fire. And Hyzier Miller was a fine player while he was over at Temple last season. Nice double-figure scorer. He's able to facilitate, but it feels like he's going to become a little bit of a black hole in that every time the ball comes to him, it's not going to be really coming back out. He's not a great three-point shooter. He shot about 29.5% from three-point range last season as a career 30.5% three-point shooter, and that's really been the bread and butter for this Virginia Tech team. Three-point shooting, and they just don't have a lot of that this season. They're really going to need someone like a Jaden Shoot to really be able to shoot it from three-point range. I just don't see that happening. So I've got Virginia Tech in my projector finish at number 17. At number 16, I'm going with Stanford. Stanford, I think, is going to be slowing things down quite a bit under Kyle Smith. Last season, they actually played quite a bit more up-tempo than they had in past years under the tutelage of Jared Hass, and I do like the fact that they bring in Ozzie Sellers. He's a 6'5", little bit of jitterbug guy, former top 150 recruit for USC, and Maximine Reynaud at 7'1" has some versatility, but when your top player is probably he along Chisholm Okpara, who I liked him over at Harvard, smart kid, so obviously that transfer, it makes a lot of sense, but when those are the guys that you're really relying upon to really give you a bunch of production, that's a little bit of a rough situation. 6'8" combo player for Okpara. Did shoot about 34.5% from three-point range. I think that the defense is going to be fine with the Stanford team, as Kyle Smith has always done a great job with his nerd ball sort of style, but even going back to what he was able to do at Washington State, it took him a little bit of time to be able to rise up a Washington State team that had been down for quite some time. He was able to go 500 or better in every single year on campus at Washington State, but the Pac-12 had more, shall we say, gimme games, more layups, rather than what you're going to be getting this season out in the ACC. On top of that, he now has to deal with just absolutely ridiculous travel. Teams are going to be having to travel to Palo Alto. That should be able to give them a nice home court advantage, but they're going to have to make a lot of ridiculous road trips. That is going to take a lot out of this team, so I do have my question marks when it comes to this bunch in Stanford. So it is a situation where I just don't think that they've got the depth this year to necessarily be a top flight contender in this conference. I do have Stanford as a result. Number 16 in terms of my projector finish. And number 15, I'm going with Georgia Tech. With Georgia Tech, I do think that they've done a relatively okay job in the transfer portal, and they do bring back three other top four scorers from a season ago. Nathan George was able to have a really nice run towards the middle part of the season last year. Bay Ndongo is someone who's 6'8". He's able to pop it from three-point range. He's able to give you some blocks, but for George, I just noticed that the team's play, it really came and went with him. When Nathaniel George was out there, he was doing a nice job being able to facilitate when he was getting everyone involved. This team had a chance to be able to win night in, night out, but when he didn't, that's where things went down the toilet bowl. Now, if you're looking for encouragement with George, the last 17 games of the season, shot 38.5% from three, 4.7 assists, 2.2 turnovers per contest, 11.5 points per game. That's something that's good to be able to get the job done. And for Georgia Tech, I will say this was one of the better shot blocking teams they were able to find in the ACC. They don't generate any turnovers at all. They were a bottom 10 team in all of college basketball in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. Did an okay job of being able to guard the three, but they were very inconsistent between their home and their road splits as well. So it does have me a little bit concerned. I actually think that Damon Stoudemire is a good coach, and bringing in Javion McCollum, who was able to do a solid job out there in the Big 12. 2 years ago, he was playing over for Siena in both locations, was able to average 8+ points per game. That's going to be help out, and Luke O'Brien is someone that's going to be coming in as well after he was over at Colorado. He's got some versatility to be able to pop it from three-point range, so you've got a little bit of something there, but when you're relying upon like Jalen Forrest being one of your top reserves, they've got a bunch of unknown freshmen. It does have me very bearish on Georgia Tech. I don't think that they've got the depth to be able to compete in this conference. I've got them number 15 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 14, I'm going to be going Florida State. I was talking about the depth of Georgia Tech. Florida State is at its best when they are able to run like 9-10 men. They've got just all these guys with ridiculous size, and they've got that once again. Daquan Davis, the freshman, is the only guy right now that I'm seeing in terms of the projected roster that is going to be having any hope whatsoever of seeing minutes that is below 6'5". So you've got good versatility there. But again, you're going to be banking on a lot of guys that you just don't know what you're going to be able to get out of them. Sans Jameer Watkins. Watkins was able to pull in some boards at 6'7", was able to pop in from three. He was a nice find from VCU a few seasons ago. And Malik Ewan, I think, is a guy that you should buy stock in right now. JuniorCollegeRecruiting.com, JUCORecruiting.com. Adam is a top 5 guy. Absolutely tore it up last season at South Plains Community College. I know there are some places that actually rated him as high as number 1 in terms of top junior college transfers, about 15 points, 9 boards per contest in South Plains. That is one of the better junior colleges that you're going to find in all of college basketball. That said, the depth just is not there like it has been for Florida State in the past. Chandler Jackson, Boston Holt, these are guys that are really going to need to step it up for the team. Jackson really didn't see a lot of minutes for the team a season ago. You're looking at Justin Thomas needing to make some contributions after he was an okay player over at UW Milwaukee, but he wasn't doing anything special. I just look at this Florida State team, and I like Jameer Watkins. Not a whole heck of a lot else that gets me juiced up about them. Number 14 in my projector finish, going with the Seminoles. At number 13, we're going to go with Cal. I do think that Cal is going to actually take some strides forward from a season ago, despite the fact that you lose Fardaws Amick, despite the fact that you lose Jalen Tyson, and Jalen Tyson is a guy that actually got drafted this past season, but I just love the way that Mark Madsen is able to coach up this team. It is a little bit of a roster turnover from a season ago. You're not going to have a lot of guys that are going to be returning from last year. You're probably going to be able to get a little bit of production on something like a Rodney Brown, who was a freshman, who was a bit of a reserve a season ago. But Ryan Petratus, who was coming over from Air Force, I remember him on the road against UNLV being able to put up a triple-double when Madsen had really things humming over at Utah Valley a few seasons ago. This was a team that was able to lock down on defense. Last year, they were 314th in the country in terms of opponents' three-point shooting percentage. That should be able to go a little bit northward. I think that they're going to do a nice job being able to generate a few more turnovers as well, as they were one of the lesser teams in all of college basketball in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, and I thought that they were able to get some really nice fits. Being able to bring in someone like a Christian Tucker from UTSA, meet me for the Roadrunners. I think that he lines up to be one of their main facilitators, while BJ Omod, 15-plus point per game guy over at North Dakota, he's probably going to be playing a little bit more off the ball as Tucker, 5.5 assists per contest. Not a great three-point shooter while he was over at UTSA last season, but guy that got to the free throw line, guy that shot 87.5% at the free throw line, contributed a little bit over a steal per game. That to me feels like a Mark Madsen guy. And Andrei Stojakovic is a former top 75 recruit that's able to pop it from three-point range. Had some flashes of brilliance while he was over at Stanford. Joseph a la Joseph is someone that's able to give you some contributions at 6'7", good versatility there. And Javon Blackshear, I really think is the X factor. He goes under the radar because he needed to apply for an extra year of eligibility. He was over at Grand Canyon last year. He had to play a little bit of a reserve role because he was coming off of injury, much like you see with baseball players coming off of injury. They were trying to ease him back, and then year number 2 is really where they're able to emerge, as Blackshear down to about 5 points per contest after when he was at his peak during the 2021-22 campaign. He was putting in there about 16 points, doling up 4 assists, shot 39.5% for 3, and I mean, even coming back from injury in a more just microwave score sort of role, shot 42% for 3 last season. That's a little bit of what Cal was missing last season, so I think that the offense is going to be solid. Rebounding without Fardaws Amick, probably going to take a little bit of a step back, but I do think that home court advantage, because a lot of teams are going to have to travel to them, I think that they're able to play spoiler, and I think that they're a little bit further ahead than Stanford right now. So do have Cal at number 13 in terms of my projector finish. Now is where the decisions come in. At number 12, I'm going with SMU. With SMU, this is just a brand spanking new team with having Andy Enfield come in. And for Andy Enfield, I thought that he did a really good job over at USC given the circumstances. Obviously, last year was a little bit less than savory, but you may recall his first 2 years at USC. He won 11 and 12 games, and then from there, he was able to get things humming. I think that the same is going to be happening over at SMU. Now, he does bring in Kevin Boopy Miller. He was one of the better players in the ACC last year. Let's call it what it is. I mean, this guy was able to give Wake Forest 15.5 points, 3.5 assists. He's a solid but not amazing three-point shooter. You're able to couple that with the fact that they are going to be bringing in quite a bit of size down low. Yohan Traore is someone that is a former top 75 recruit. I think that he's going to be able to do a good job with his program as well. But again, what is the chemistry going to be looking like? Because this team could be like number 14, number 15 towards the beginning part of the season. Then they could be playing like a bubble team towards the end of the season. I could very well see that with SMU, just with all the moving parts that are trying to be able to acclimate. Chuck Harris is back from season ago, but he's pretty much the only player that is going to be remaining other than Keon Ambrose Hilton. Tibet Gronair comes in from San Jose State, old San Jose State, was able to coach him up well. He was able to put in there some nice points at 6'9". He's able to pop it from three-point range, but again, have a lot of question marks with what you're going to be able to get in terms of guys outside of Kevin Boopy Miller in that backcourt. I don't know if they're going to be necessarily the most rock-solid team down low. I think that's going to be a little bit of a year of transition for SMU. As a result, I've got them number 12 in terms of my projector finish. And number 11, I'm going with Notre Dame. With Notre Dame, the big question becomes, what sorts of strides forward is this team going to be able to take? Because they are essentially running it back from last year with adding in their Matt Aloco. And I love Matt Aloco. He is able to go a loco for you, as this guy last season while he was over at Princeton, 3.5 assists, 12.5 points, a guy that was able to pop it at about a 42.5% clip from three-point range, and that's such a big key for Micah Shrewsbury coach teams. You recall when he had things really rocking and rolling over at Penn State, they were able to shoot it so well from three-point range, and he has a team that last year was in the bottom 75 in terms of three-point shooting percentage. Marcus Burton, a nice go-to scorer that was able to give you 17.5 points, 4.3 assists, nearly 2 steals per contest. The one thing he didn't do was shoot it well from three at about 30%. Tay Davis, solid player, 9 points, 5 boards, shot 19% from three. Brandon Shrewsbury is pretty much the only guy last season that shot above 33% from three that saw meaningful minutes. He shot about 37% from distance. The coach's son really able to come through there, and Aloco should be able to help out with that a little bit, but it felt like this team was playing on grit, tenacity, and they were playing a little bit of rah-rah mode. How big of a stride forward are these guys able to take from another year? I know that we were talking about that a little bit with Tristan Freeman. That's a big question that I do have with this Notre Dame team. I think that they're going to be better than what they were a season ago, but at the same time as well, they're not going to be sneaking up on as many teams, and I do think that with Notre Dame, just the overall talent, I wish I could put it any other way, just isn't there like it is with so many of these other ACC teams. So I do have Notre Dame at number 11 in terms of my projector finish. At number 10, I'm going with Pittsburgh. With Pittsburgh, the loss of Bub Carrington, I think, is just absolutely massive because that guy had his fingerprints on a little bit of everything that the team did. And Blake Hinson, want to talk about a guy that you could go to for a bucket, 18.5 points per game at 6'7", last 2 seasons was shooting north of 40% from three-point range. So Ishmael Leggett is going to really need to be legging it out for this team after he shot about 34.5% from three, 12.5 points, 5.5 rebounds per game. And this is a team that's rock solid down low. Chris Austin is a nice shot blocker, came in from High Point a few seasons ago. He was able to do a nice job there, so I don't think that the loss of Frederico is going to be massive for a Pittsburgh team that has been one of the better teams in terms of opponents' two-point shooting percentage and block shot rate. But I'm so glad that he also mentioned the young gun in Jalen Lowe, a guy that was like a fringe top 100 recruit from a season ago. But you just take a look at what he was able to do from January 16th on, and he was really able to emerge for the team. Overall for the season was averaging about 35% from three-point range, was able to give the team some solid contributions, 9.5 points, a little bit over 3 assists per contest, but in that back half of the season is where he was really able to shine, supplying 13.5 points, a little bit over 4 assists, shot from three-point range 38.5% from distance. But I would have liked to have seen Pittsburgh just do a little bit more in the transfer portal, as I felt like they needed a few more pieces to be able to replace so much of that scoring from the season ago. And Damian Dunn is a good place to be able to start. Cam Corrin should be able to give you some nice production down low, as you've got Papa Conte who's back. The Diaz grandbrothers, they're going to be back as well, with Guillermo being the guy that I look at the most. But you're really going to be banking on Dunn coming in from Temple and trying to be able to, for lack of a better term, be able to get the job done here, as he also spent a year over at Houston where he was a little bit more of an afterthought. At Houston, 6.5 points per game, primarily coming off the bench. Wasn't necessarily the world's most amazing three-point shooter there. Overall for his career, only shoots about 31.5% from three, and that's a big missing element for Pittsburgh that is not going to be replaced from a season ago, and that does have me a little bit more bearish on this team. So Pittsburgh is my number 10 pick in terms of my projector finish in the ACC. Number 9, I'm going with NC State. I certainly don't think we're going to see NC State be able to have that Herculean run that we saw a season ago, and they do lose a lot of that top scoring from a season ago. You lose pretty much 4 of your top 5 scorers from a year ago, but Michael O'Connell, what he was able to do to be able to get this team to be able to make that big giant run, I know that he had 1 or 2 big giant shots that really just prolonged that run in general, and he was massive. If you look from the beginning of the ACC tournament until they were ousted in the Final Four from Purdue, he was able to put up double figures in 6 of those final 10 games. in terms of the first few games of the season, he had done so 3 times in the first 31 games that he had played in. He was very much a pass-first guy. I mean, that extends all the way back to his time at Stanford as he transferred in from a few seasons ago, but he was able to do a nice job just facilitating some offense. Jaden Taylor was able to step up for this team as well. He's that main double-figure scorer that is going to be returning from a season ago. But now the question becomes, how do you turn the page without having DJ Turn It Up Burns in the fold, as he was able to do? Obviously, you saw the NCAA tournament run a little bit of everything for the team. They bring in Dontrez Styles, who began his career over at North Carolina. Last year at Georgetown was a nice double-figure scorer, but not a guy that necessarily wows you. Marcus Hill, he was able to give you 20 points per game while he was over at Bowling Green last year, but not a great three-point shooter. Have to wonder if the amount of scoring was due to the fact that he didn't have a lot around him. Ben Middlebrooks, I think, is going to be able to do a nice job down low, along with Brandon Huntley Hatfield. And Huntley Hatfield was really able to start over at Louisville, but keep in mind, he was a former top 125 recruit of Tennessee as well. At 6'10", has been able to extend his range a little bit. Mikey James, I have my question marks on. I do have to wonder if his production at Louisville was just out of necessity or if he's really that good of a player. But for NC State, I do think that they're going to be able to maintain from a season ago. I feel like they underachieved towards the beginning part of the season, then they overachieved in the back half of the season. They aren't as good as that team that made the Final Four. I also don't believe that they're as bad as the team that finished outside the top 9 in the ACC last season as well. I think that we're going to be seeing something in the middle. I've got them number 9 in terms of my projector finish. At number 8, I'm going with Syracuse. I think Syracuse is going to be going back to the days of being very bubblicious for the NCAA tournament. They do lose Judah Mintz, and J.J. Starlin had a little bit of a rough start to the year last year, but I do think that Starlin was able to really find himself towards the back half of the year last year. He was very hot and cold from three-point range, but he was able to find it a little bit more late. And then Chris Bell, just a versatile guy that was able to shoot 42% from 3, 12 points, not necessarily going to give you a ton of rebounding. He needs to work on that. He's got a little bit too much size to be averaging fewer than 3 rebounds per game. But I do think that with Syracuse, they've done a nice job of just being able to bulk up a little bit more down low. You still have Naheem McLeod, who at 7'4" is just an absolute monster. You're able to pair that up with a guy in Starlin that in his final 16 games of the season was averaging nearly 16 points per contest, shooting 36.5% from three-point range after he was shooting very poorly towards the beginning part of the season. There's reason for optimism there. Eddie Lampkin was a starter for TCU when they were able to make the NCAA tournament. Had a few off-the-court sort of situations, but you saw what he was able to do over at Colorado last season. And Jaquan Carlos, I think that he is a really good replacement for what you lose from a season ago, because with Jaquan Carlos, when he was over at Hofstra, he was able to do a nice job just being able to dish out the ball, 6.5 assists. He's a competent three-point shooter. Not amazing, but shot 34.5% from three-point range, right around about 10.5 points per game, and it's very clear with Syracuse they are going to be getting away from that 2-3 zone. We saw that a season ago, but still relatively short, well outside the top 200 in terms of opponents' three-point shooting percentage. But they also were one of the better teams in terms of being able to force turnovers. Carlos, I think, has the active hands to really fit what Mr. Adrian Autry is looking to do with this defense. You also have to like the fact that you bring in the Delaware transfer in Jair Davis, who was a little bit of a Sachi suffer season ago as well. I think that Lucas Taylor has a bit of upside for this team along Chance Westry, and I think that this team has a little bit more depth than what a lot of people want to give them credit for, especially the 6'9" freshman and Donnie Freeman, who I think was one of the more underrated players in this 2024 recruiting class. So do have Syracuse at number 8 in terms of my projector finish. At number 7, we're going with Louisville. There's no sense in talking about any of their stats from last year because, well, they do not return a single player from last year's team. You do have Pat Kelsey bringing with him a few guys from his previous stop. Rain Smith is someone that should be able to rein it in from three-point range. I absolutely love what he was able to do in terms of bringing in someone in a Terrence Edwards, who I recognize that James Madison left the CAA a few seasons ago, but very familiar with his game. Edwards was able to put up 17 plus points per contest while he was over at James Madison, and I think that Pat Kelsey really has a team that is going to look to zag while everyone else zigs, because with Pat Kelsey and his time over at Charleston, year number 1, they were really getting out there, they were really forcing turnovers, and they were a team that really wanted to bomb it from three-point range. I think that he's got sort of that here. The guy that I think goes under the radar, Abakar Traore. He comes over from Long Beach State. I don't know if he's going to get a ton of minutes, but This guy's saying 6'5". He's able to pop it from 3. Was averaging for the last 2 seasons north of 7 rebounds per game. He's going to be a big weapon for the team. Keshawn Pryor is going to be rock solid down low. We saw what he was able to do over at South Florida. I have my question marks with Chucky Hepburn. With Chucky Hepburn, he would have moments of brilliance with Wisconsin, and then he would just completely fade away. You recall that NIT game against North Texas about a year and a half ago, where he put up like 10 points in the first 8 minutes, and then in the final 9 minutes, Wisconsin scored as many points as Greg Peterson. And Greg Peterson is out of college basketball team, so a little bit of an issue there, but Giovanni Headley coming over, he should be able to be a nice 6'6" combo player that fits what Pat Kelsey is looking to do, and that's what Pat Kelsey wants. A bunch of guys are able to pop it from 3. Prior, a little bit of question mark there, but Noah Waterman at 6'11", he's able to do so. You've got a lot of versatility, you've got a lot of experience on this team. I could see a situation where Louisville might be a little bit sluggish coming out of the gates, but then they're playing like a top 5 team in the ACC towards the back half of it. Pat Kelsey, I think, is one of the better coaches in all of college basketball. Great hire by Louisville. Has done a great job assembling this roster. I've got Louisville, number 7, in terms of my projector finish. And number 6, we're going to go with a little bit more of something tried and true. I'm going with Virginia. I recognize what we last saw, and what we last saw from Virginia was absolutely horrible. Like, they went in reality like 45 minutes of real time without scoring a stinking point against Colorado State. And Colorado State, not necessarily the monsters of the Midway on defense, but for Virginia, even though you do lose Reese Beekman from a season ago, Isaac McNeely is a guy that's able to pop it in north of 40% from 3-point range. I think that they found the perfect replacement for what you're going to be losing from those backcourt pieces from a season ago. That'd be Jalen Worley. Worley is not going to be going out there and scoring a double-figure amount of points. This is not a guy that's going to be seeking a whole bunch of threes or anything like that, but he's going to facilitate. That should be able to help out with bringing in someone in Mr. TJ Power, who I thought that he was just a little bit underutilized over at Duke last season, a former top 30 recruit that only was able to put up about 2.5 points per contest, but did shoot 35.5% from 3-point range as a 6'9", little bit of a combo player in the small sample size that we saw. And I do think that Tony Bennett is at a little bit of a crossroads, because it does feel like the game is starting to pass him by just a little bit. You can't play the same way now than you were able to just a few seasons ago. The question is he going to let someone like a TJ Power have, for lack of a better term, a little bit more power? Is he going to let him cook a little bit more? And is he going to say, okay, we're going to continue our pack line defense, we're going to continue to play good, rock-solid defense, but at the same time, when we're down 15, 20 points, we're not going to be running the shot clock down to 1. And I think that Tony Bennett is smart enough to realize, hey, maybe we need to make a little bit more situational adjustments. I think that he's going to be willing to learn as a coach. I think that that's going to be massive for a Virginia team that you tell that there was some inconsistency with them on the road as well. They gave up more than 15 points more per 100 possessions when they were on the road rather than when they were at home. They've got one of the better home court advantages in all of college basketball, but when they were away from the great state of Virginia, you could tell that things went a little bit more haywire for them. I think that Elijah Saunders coming in from San Diego State, that's going to be able to help restore a little bit of defense. And then Andrew Rohde was a little bit of an afterthought coming over from St. Thomas last year. I think another year in the system is going to be able to do him quite a bit of good as well. So I do think that Virginia going to be able to rise up a little bit here. I've got them number 6 in terms of my projector or finish. And number 5, I'm going with Miami. With Miami, I think that the loss of No Chad Omier is really going to be hurting them, but I love the fact that they bring in Lynn Kidd. Lynn Kidd is a man that knows how to play in the post in the ACC, because he was over at Virginia last year, and while he was over at Virginia Tech, I should say, last season, he was able to log 6.5 rebounds, 13 points per contest. Not a guy that's going to be trying to pop it from 3-point range. As a matter of fact, I don't know if he's ever made a 3-pointer in his life, but he's going to be able to provide the bread and butter down low. And then one of the best freshmen in all of college basketball is going to be entering to be able to help out this backcourt in Jaleel Bethea. At 6'4", he's a okay facilitator. I think that you're going to need to look to Nigel Pack to really be able to pack it and just be able to dish out the ball, but as we know with Pack, he's a lethal 3-point shooter. Dealt with some injuries last season, so I don't feel like we saw the best of Pack last season. Matthew Cleveland sometimes can get a little bit shot happy, sometimes can be a little bit, shall we say, of a black hole, to utilize that term. But Brandon Johnson coming in at 6'8", guy that's able to pop it from 3, guy that's able to help out down low as well. That's going to be big. And Jalen Blackman could be that perfect 6-man, comes in as a microwave scorer. Kyrie Huey, he's a gentleman from Idaho State that should be able to give this team a few minutes off the bench. He's a little bit of a insurance policy if Flynn Kidd is not quite what they were expecting as well. I think that this team has much more depth than they did have a season ago, because for Miami, when they had one or two injuries in ACC play last season, because they had some nice moments in non-conference play, like when they were entering into conference play, they were still looking like an NCAA tournament team, and then things just went completely down the pooper for them. That's because they had a few injuries. Now they're going to be able to sustain some of those and be able to keep things moving with AJ Stanton-McCray being able to come in. And with Miami, I was talking about it with our good friend in Tristan Freeman. This team needs to play a lick of defense, but when they were able to make those runs to the Elite Eight and the Final Four a few seasons ago, it's not that they were like completely locking down teams from three-point range. It's not like teams were not getting open looks or anything like that. The way that they were able to play defense was by being able to generate steals, bringing in someone like a Stanton McCray from Sam Amford. That is going to be massive for them, because Miami just was not able to generate those steals and turnovers like they have in the past. I think that roar is going to be coming back for them, and that's a big reason why I've got them back in my top 5. Number 5 in my projector finish, I'm going to be going with Miami. And number 4, I do like Clemson in this ordeal. With Clemson, they've been able to do such a good job of just being able to ascend over the last few years. They are going to need to replace two big-time scorers in PJ Hall, Joseph Girard. These two guys combined for about 33.5 points per contest. With Hall, he did have his fingerprints all over a little bit of everything, but Chase Hunter, I believe, is going to shoot better than 31% from three-point range. You look at what he was able to do in past seasons, shooting more like 34.5%, 35.5% from three-point range. I do think that he's going to be able to restore that. With Girard, he took a little bit more of a backseat in terms of having the ball in his hands. 2 seasons ago, was able to average about 4.5 assists per game, so I do think that he's going to be able to get back to those old ways, and I think that Brad Brownell has just found himself as a coach, because we always talk about it in terms of players, with them being able to turn a corner with a little bit of experience. Coaches do that as well. There are some coaches that they make mistakes early on in their career, and then they're able to correct those a little bit later on. I feel like he's been able to do that, and with losing PJ Hall, they bring in a good replacement in Victor Larkin, who's not going to go out there and be like super versatile or anything like that, but at 6'11", this was a rock-solid rebounder over at Cincinnati last year. Jake Highbretter being able to sit out, just being able to take in the game, that's something that is massive for the team as well. And then their freshman in Dallas Thomas, he's standing 6'7", he's got some good versatility. I think that he fits very well in this Clemson style, where they are looking for a lot of guys. They're going to be willing to pop it from three-point range. You're going to play slowly, but they're going to execute their stuff. They are not going to turn the ball over. They're not going to turn you over either. They were a bottom 25 team in all of college basketball in terms of turnovers forced on a per-game basis, but they do the little things. They don't beat themselves. They do a nice job not allowing you to get offensive rebounds, and they shoot well at the free throw line. A top 20 team in terms of free throw shooting percentage. They brought in a lot of guys that they shoot it well at the charity stripe. I do think that the Clemson Tigers, once again this year, going to do the little things that result in winning. I've got Clemson at number 4 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 3, I like Wake Forest. Wake Forest is going to be bringing back so much from a season ago, and you just don't find that in this day and age of college basketball, and I truly do think that Steve Forbes is a good coach. He's had some slip-ups in the ACC tournament that have been very costly, and for Wake Forest, for the love of Pete, you need to do a little bit of a better job on the defensive front as well, as this team was well outside the top 100 in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis. But the one thing that Wake Forest did a very good job of, they did not allow a lot of second chances. They were a top 75 team in terms of percentage of opponents' missed shots that resulted in an offensive rebound. Now they themselves need to find a way to be able to get more second chances, and I do think that you're going to see Efton Reed come a little bit more into his own, because he got a little bit of a late start to the season. He was one of those two-time transfers that had to miss the first 6 or 7 games of the season last year because he was fighting for eligibility, but when he was out there, he was able to log about 8 rebounds per game, and the big thing for Wake Forest is that they just didn't have a lot of depth last year. They were banking on Damari Monsanto really being a sixth man for this team. He was only able to get out there for 11 games. He was dealing with injury. Now you've got Parker Fredrickson, who's a nice microwave scorer off the bench. He's able to shoot about 36.5% from three-point range, and albeit you do lose Kevin Boopy Miller, he's going to be playing in the conference over at SMU, but you do a nice job of just being able to restock a little bit more with bringing in Omaha Blue. Omaha Blue did not get out there pretty much at all on the court for Iowa State, but this is a former top 35 recruit. This is one of the most highly touted recruits to come out of the state of Wisconsin since, I would say, Tyler Hero, and I think that overall at 6'8", he's going to bring a really nice dynamic to a team team that has a lot of guys that do a bit of everything, like Hunter Salas at 6'5" is able to facilitate. Cameron Hildreth already has a triple-double to his credit. If you're looking at something that might be a little bit of trepidation, you're probably looking at Tyler Johnson having the ball in his hands quite a bit, maybe playing a little bit more than what a lot of people would expect because you do lose that main facilitator in Kevin Boopie Miller. But one thing that Steve Forbes always does, he finds that guy that is just going to be there. He's going to do a nice job of just being able to set up the offense. Last season, Kevin Boopie Miller was really that main facilitator, but you just go back at his teams. Like 2 seasons ago, Tyree Appleby, he was eating good in the neighborhood. He was able to give the team 6.5 assists as that top flight scorer. You had Alondis Williams before that. He was able to just absolutely wreck some shop. And even if you're taking a look at that COVID season, Davion Williamson was able to come into his own a little bit as well. That was a year where the team had a little bit more of a, shall we say, suspect record. That was year number 1 under Steve Forbes. He was trying to get his fingerprints all over the program, but I do think that Steve Forbes is finally going to be able to bust through. I think that they have quite a bit more depth than they did a season ago. That's going to allow them to be able to have success in this conference. I've got Wake Forest at number 3 in terms of my projector finish. And number 2, I'm going with North Carolina. North Carolina was able to win the ACC last year, and they're going to suffer down low. Let's call it what it is. Armando Bacot was in college basketball for about 500 years. He was Van Wilder and then some for this UNC team, and he also had some help down low as well. Let's not forget Harrison Ingram was very good in the post. He was able to give the team 12 points, 9 rebounds, and really gave the team a dynamic that they hadn't had under Hubert Davis. He was able to pop it from 3 while being able to do a nice job of being able to pull in those rebounds. But RJ Davis is one of the most special players in all of college basketball. A go-to guy that's able to do a nice job being able to facilitate, but I feel like Elliot Cadu is going to be able to come into his own, be able to take that nice leap from year number 1 to year number 2 as we saw some flashes of brilliance from him last season, and he's not a selfish player either. A guy that will only put up about 7.5 points per game. You're going to need a little bit more than that, but I think that he's going to recognize his role of, hey, I need to get the ball to RJ Johnson. I need to get the ball to these great freshmen that are going to be coming in, and you saw that from him. In the final 20 games of the season last year, he was averaging 4.5 assists, 7.5 points, a steal per contest. Didn't shoot it well from 3. He only shot like 18% from 3-point range, so you're not going to be banking on him to be able to elevate this team. The question mark becomes those 2 top-flight freshmen that they've got coming in. You've got 2 5-star guys, Ian Jackson, Drake Boom Boom Powell. These 2 guys stand right around 6'5", 6'6". They're probably going to be fighting for minutes with Kate Tyson, who's coming in from Belmont. He should be able to do a pretty solid job coming over, as I know that his brother Hunter Tyson, he had quite a bit of success in the conference. He was playing over at Belmont a few seasons ago, and for Tyson, he was a guy that was just flat out under-recruited, in my opinion. Last season over at Belmont was able to pop it from 3-point range at 46.5%, 16 points per game, textbook perfect fit for North Carolina. And for North Carolina, what they discovered last year, that thing called defense. Because for North Carolina, the big reason why they underachieved so badly 2 seasons ago was that they could not play a lick of defense to save their lives. Last season, they were a top 40 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They did not allow opponents to be able to get second chances, while they themselves were able to get first chances. They had this team be one of the top teams in terms of overall rebound rate, which it is going to be taking a little bit of a fall off. You're going to be looking at someone like a Jalen Washington to be able to lend a few more minutes. After last season, he was primarily a reserve, a guy that came in off the bench, was only able to give you about 2.5 rebounds per game. You're going to need to get a little bit more out of him and Jalen Withers, but I do think that North Carolina has a bit more depth than in past years. I do think that Hubert Davis, recognizing that he's got RJ Davis, and then let's call it what it is, not really that true Robin, is going to be willing to trot out there a few different rotations. I think that he's going to be willing to go with more of a 7 to 8 man rotation with Van Allen Lubin being able to come in, and I think that that's actually going to be a good thing for North Carolina. So I do have them at number 2 in my projector finish, and number 1 in terms of my projector finish, it is Duke. I can't put them number 1 overall in the country just because I do feel like there are a few question marks with regards to this team. If they had Jeremy Roach back then, I feel like you would have a few more answers, but Zion James is a guy that goes really under the radar in the transfer portal. He comes in from Tulane at right around about 6'6", double-figure scorer that's able to give you 2 steals. He's able to give you 5+ rebounds. He's able to give you 4+ assists. He's able to shoot it well from 3-point range. You need him to sell hot dogs at the hot dog stand during halftime. He's able to do that as well. And then you've got Caleb Foster, who I think is going to be able to be that guy that takes a year 1 1 to year 2 jump. We saw that last year with Tyrese Proctor. Tyrese Proctor had some flashes of brilliance as a freshman, but you could tell that he was a little bit raw, became a really nice facilitator for Duke last year, and was just really smart with the ball, and that's a big thing for Duke. This team has actually slowed down quite a bit under Jon Scheyer. In their 2 years under Jon Scheyer, they've been outside the top 200 in terms of total possessions per game. They're not running it and gunning it, but you saw with Foster last season, a guy that was able to pop it at about a 40.5% clip from three-point range. He was able to give the team 7.5 points per game, and he's a willing passer as well. He's not an amazing passer, but at 6'5", was able to give you multiple assists per game. So I liked what I saw there. Certainly it was a little bit touch and go with him throughout the season, but he was really coming into his own until he had a bit of a season-ending injury. He was starting to be pushed back into the starting rotation before he goes down in the latter half of December. By all indications, looks like he should be able to be good to go this season, so I like that. Obviously, Cooper Flagg. I mean, if you just turn on the YouTube tapes and what have you, this guy is 6'9". He's able to pop it from three-point range. He's got good handles. He's able to facilitate. He's a tremendous defender as well, and Duke has been hanging their hat quite a bit more on defense under Jon Scheyer as well. In both of their years under Jon Scheyer, this has been one of the better defensive teams in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis in all of college basketball. And though Kyle Filipowski put up great numbers for the team, if you were actually watching the games towards the end of the 2023-24 season, you could tell that he was starting to become a little bit more of a liability out there. He would get flustered. I don't think that Cooper Flagg is built like that. I think that if there's times of adversity and strife, he's going to be able to fight through them a little bit more than someone like Kyle Filipowski. And then I'm going to continue to get this name wrong. I apologize. But Kamen Mulach, who's the 7'1" big man that we saw at the Olympics, he was really able to showcase himself well. He's going to be able to provide something down low, not a guy that's going to have uber versatility or anything like that. That's why you bring in Zion James. That's why you bring in Malik Brown, and also Mason Gillis, who at 6'6", was a really nice three-point shooter for a Purdue team that was able to make it all the way to the national title a season ago. Isaiah Evans is a guy that could be able to see some minutes as well. This team has great depth. They've got great versatility. They are strong down low. They've got good backcourt play. The biggest question I have, can Tyrese Proctor go from being a good facilitator to being more like a great facilitator? Just because with Jeremy Roach out, the onus falls on him a little bit more, but I do feel like Caleb Foster going to be able to help out in that backcourt a little bit more as well. Duke, my number one team in terms of my projector finish for the ACC, and that will wrap things up for the ACC Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Big thanks to Tristan Freeman, does amazing work over at Boston Brackets. He joined me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Gene_D1. Keep in mind, letter CM, maybe does not matter, so as per usual, please just send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, and I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season, off season, what have you. We're down to 4 conference previews, and then once we do those, we're going to be set for an amazing college basketball season. So I appreciate you joining me today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.